Very good. So, I suppose a big thing around sport is like our preparation and recovery. In the lead up to games, what should athletes be looking to do from a nutritional and hydration standpoint to prepare? And on the contrary, what should athletes be doing to recover?
Love it. And I'll say we go through it, but I might flick back to you and get a, layperson's take on what we should be doing and then maybe throw some corrections in there. But for the most part, I'd say a common thing I might come across is people are like, oh, like I should make sure I smash all the carbohydrates pre-game. Um, show hands in the room. We sort of like netball, basketball, a little bit of tennis, some running. I got a few hands, like sort of team-based sports or what we call like interval activity-based sports. So a fair bit of like stop start, or you might like be going hard for a few minutes and then might go up the other end and you got a little moment for a breather. Depending on the length of the game, like for the most part, you're actually probably not going to run out of energy or carbohydrates. Your body's actually pretty good at having a bit of a solid store. When you move into, longer endurance type activities, so some tennis matches, if we think about the tennis matches that go for, 3-4 hours, or games that might go for 5-6 minutes, absolutely. So as soon as we get over that sort of 60-minute threshold for activities, it might be worth considering being really targeted with our carbohydrates. But for the most part, if you think about what happens before a game, you're probably going to have a lighter day the day before. If you're doing really heavy training the day before, maybe talk to Patty because there might be something going on there. But for the most part, we just need to maintain our nutrition. So make sure we're having regular food. We're having foods that have carbohydrates in them. So I think things like pastas and rices and beans, or any of those sort of bready, carby foods that probably come to mind. But chances are we're probably not going to need to go crazy, particularly if it's just a game. I can see some like younger people in the room. So if you're talking like more carnival or maybe a weekender sport type thing, again, could be worth considering maybe a few extra carbohydrates, because you might have back to back. You might play a game and have a short break and then another one. So it can be good to sort of what we call like front load or have a fair bit beforehand. But for just a one-off game, you can probably feel pretty comfy that the lighter exercise day coupled with just regular food intake, you're probably going to be on the money. Then in terms of the day, we're probably looking at, a meal sort of 2 to 3 hours beforehand. Again, thinking we probably want some carbohydrates in there, some protein. Regular food's going to be just fine. It doesn't have to be anything too crazy or special. And then like another snack, sort of an hour or so beforehand for the most part. One thing I would say with that is it's going to be personal to you. So for me, my body does not do food close to sport. I'm going to be feeling very unwell if I'm having food within, 45 minutes of running around. Other people I know, they can just smash an entire meal and then walk out onto the field and they're like, what do you mean? Like, I feel great. I'm like, cool, like, go you. But what doesn't work for me might work for some people, and you can sort of help your body adapt to that a little bit. But do what's comfy for you. For thinking like big game, feeling nervous beforehand, go for foods that are familiar. So, if you're like, I'm gonna have a food that I've never had before a game before on grand final day. I probably wouldn't. I'd go for your stock standard, regular things that you go towards. But those are the sort of timeframes you're looking at, and it's in the resource I got floating around. That's probably what I've got outlined there as well. And I'm happy to email it around. But a surprisingly maybe boring answer there is just some regular food and probably some carbohydrates in there, and you'll be on the money. And we can get very tailored with this stuff, but unfortunately, you probably need to go hang out with someone and spend a fair bit of time with them to be able to get that type of individualized information, because we really need to know what's going on for you, potentially things like your weight and dietary pattern, so that we can really tailor to you and also your goals. Then in terms of recovery, probably very similar sort of vein. So eat something after the game is generally a pretty good start. Carbohydrates are going to be great because that's going to replenish all the carbohydrates that you've used. So again, things like breads or pastas or muesli bars or fruit or any of those types of things. And then we're probably going to want some protein in there as well, because you've just used a whole bunch of your muscles and they wouldn't mind some love and attention to help them be feeling ready to do the next activity. And so protein type food. So we're thinking obviously things like meats, could be beans or nuts or legumes, things like dairy. Who's heard of like chalky milk post game? I feel like it's almost a religion at this point. And it is a fantastic food, and the reason milk, or it doesn't have to be chocolate milk, it could just be plain milk, but I think people prefer chocolate milk, is because it's sort of got all the variety of things that we might consider wanting post-game. So it's got carbohydrates, it's got protein, it's got vitamins and minerals, it's got electrolytes, and it's got water in it. So it's sort of this really nicely packaged, oh, it's got everything like I could possibly want. It doesn't have to be chocolate milk. You could get that from a variety of other foods, and that's totally fine. But chocolate milk's just very convenient. So that's sort of the reason I suppose people think like, oh, I should have chalky milk. But have you ever stopped to think about who came up with chalky milk and why has it become this like post-sport thing that everyone does? It's because it's a really cool food, but you don't have to have chocolate milk if you don't want to. You can just have a peanut butter sandwich and some water and a piece of fruit, and that'll do exactly the same thing. You can wrap it up however you like it. Right,
Does timing matter? I suppose I know this probably isn't exactly in the script, but something that I think about often after, athletes compete in sport is like, when should they be consuming, their carbohydrate, protein intakes, and does that matter when they do that?
Yeah, it can be situation dependent. So, if we're thinking again, I'll say like carnival type scenario, we're probably going to want to eat as soon as we can after our game or match or round, just because you're obviously backing up pretty soon. If you've got, 4 games in a day, we're probably gonna have it as soon as we can, so that we're getting as much in before the next round as we can. If we're talking, say, like, it's just Saturday netball and we've got that 1 game on Saturday and then maybe we're not training again till Monday, you've got a little bit more time to play with. If you don't eat until you get home and that's an hour and a half drive, like, she'll be right type thing. If you can pack something, fantastic, but it's not going to make or break your situation. Your body is really responsive to what you do. So in an ideal scenario, yeah, within sort of the first 30 minutes to an hour, we might try to get some carbohydrates and protein in to start the process of recovery. But that's not to say that after that window, your body shuts down and it's like, "Bop, bow, we don't do this anymore." It's going to keep doing it for 24, 48 hours. So we can just keep that regular intake of carbohydrates and proteins or food, and it will keep continuing to do that recovery process. So yes, timing matters, but like if you miss a window or it's in the too hard basket, sometimes we have late games or it's a big drive, like, it'll be okay. You can keep doing it when you get home and you can keep chipping away at it. It's only really when we have heavy back-to-back stuff, or maybe you've got a huge training on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday because you're playing 4 different sports and you're, got a million games happening, then you're probably going to want to start prioritizing stuff closer to post-training. But that's only so that you can begin that recovery process to get as ready as you can for the next thing that's coming up in your sports calendar.
It's actually such a big part, I suppose, for those multi-sport athletes and like, yeah, athletes that, play carnivals and whatnot. Like, yeah, I think that nutritional intake is massive for recovery and preparation, really. We have a number of like common fads and misconceptions that live in sport, and particularly in the age of social media where information's sort of readily available to us and often not correctly sourced or researched correctly. What have you found to be some of the big misconceptions around diet and sport?
Um, Lots, plenty, few and far between. There's all sorts of interesting and wonderful things that people come up with. Um, so one that is an emerging or interesting one is this idea of essentially sort of starving yourself. I can't think of the name of it now, but starving yourself sort of pre-training or pre-exercise to sort of improve your abilities to utilize your body's ability to utilize fat when you're doing physical activity. And there's some interesting evidence. We haven't found good translation to, say, performance. So athletes that are trying this long term, sometimes they get an improvement in performance, but for the most part, they don't. But that is an interesting one you come across. For the most part, it doesn't do a better job than if you just provide your body with food and train hard and get the adaptations from exercise. Patty and I were talking about this beforehand. Nutrition comes along and like holds your hand to get the best out of exercise. It's not sort of the main player. It's sort of like stands off to the side and is like a cheerleader and is really helpful. But if you're not doing the training and you're not doing the hard work, like the physical activity and the strength and conditioning, you're not going to see the potential rewards that you might hope for from nutrition. So got to be putting in the work. And so I think that's where a lot of this stuff falls down, is maybe we maybe get too focused on nutrition, and so we don't get those physical activity benefits of actually doing the training. I'm trying to think of like rogue stuff that you come across. It's probably less sports specific and just like rogue information that then filters its way into sports. So like, I don't know, seed oils are pretty big at the moment, that they're like out to get you. They're fine. Stuff like that. Obviously things like the carnivore diet you come across, particularly like very high level athletes that might sort of latch on to a particular dietary pattern, and then that sort of filters down into grassroots sports sometimes, or even just like other athletes. I know that's definitely happened in the cricket space. There's sort of some particular elite athletes that follow a particular dietary pattern, and then that sort of filters across the group. So you spend a lot of time just trying to help people make an informed choice, like your body, your choice, but do you know what you're doing, and is this what you want to be doing for the most part? What's something you come across, and then maybe I can debunk it.
Yeah, I think clinically and in our place of work, like we come across, I suppose, lots of athletes talking about protein intake and whether they should be taking protein and what age they should be taking it at. And it's often a really tricky conversation for myself as a clinician and an S&C coach, because we don't necessarily, or I'm sort of unsure, I suppose, around like whether we should be telling our young athletes to start taking protein or whether they need it or not. So I don't know whether that's a misconception or not from your part.
Yeah, I'd say it's a tough one because it's sort of a misconception and sort of not. Obviously, like protein is an essential nutrient. Your body needs it. We need protein to do all sorts of things in the body. And sport has maybe moved into a space more recently where we're sort of like, protein is life, like protein is everything. And if I just, the more protein, the better, and the better I'll be. That's probably where the misconception is sort of more is better to a point, and then after that, no worries. Like you've already reached the upper limit and it's not going to get any better after that point. So we actually don't need to have any more than that. Depending on how big you are and how much experience you have and how much training you're doing, that's going to determine how much protein your body needs. For the most part, I would say I've actually very rarely come across someone that's not having enough protein. We actually, our sort of like general Australian dietary pattern, very rarely am I coming across someone that's not getting adequate protein. And that includes athletes, but also just day-to-day people. Most day-to-day people are having enough protein to support being like a heavyweight, like powerlifting athlete. Like, and it's not doing any harm, but also like if we're thinking athletes, like for the most part, you're probably already having enough protein. What we'll often do, so if you came to see me, we'd be looking at, okay, where is that protein coming from? So what foods? When are you having it over the day? Is it all happening at dinner? Which is probably quite common for athletes. Like we might have some meat with dinner and maybe not a whole lot happening at breakfast. And so it's really back end. And so what we might want to do is sort of spread it out a little bit more evenly to essentially make the most of your body adapting to protein after exercise. So what we call muscle protein synthesis, or just a big fancy way for your body saying like, we'll make some more muscle because exercise has told us that that'd be a good idea. And so if we can space out our protein nicely, that's going to basically keep sending a little signal to your body being like, hey, keep making muscle. Yeah, keep doing it. Keep going. Like, good job. So it's often more the distribution or the timing or the source as opposed to total protein intake. So does that, yeah.
I think that answers that really well. Yeah. And often, like, that's so common to see. Yeah, athletes probably take a big intake over like dinner time with, meat and three veg or some meat and carbohydrates in a pasta then. So we don't often eat meat for breakfast. Yeah, I suppose it's probably more cereal based. So it makes a lot of sense that way.
Or sometimes our breakfast sources might not actually be super protein rich. So like bacon actually doesn't have that much protein in it compared to say like a leaner source of meat. It definitely does, but it might not be getting you to that sort of optimal or ideal amount we might want for a meal. So it's just that balancing. I didn't touch on supplements. I'll go by the book to begin with, which is refer to your national sporting organisation guidelines. So most national sporting organisations will have a statement about supplement use in adolescent or non-adult athletes. And so that's what you should go off. Outside of that, if you go see an individual practitioner, they can sort of individually advise you on whether or not it would be appropriate. For protein specifically, sort of maybe leaning from what I said, for the most part, most people are getting enough protein just through like general dietary intake just fine. It's often just a bit of a game of, moving some of the pieces around to distribute it differently. What protein powders definitely are, or sort of what we call functional foods, if you sort of like come across like a Cliff Bar and it's like, I've got 30 grams of protein in me, or like your Rockaby milk drinks, like they're sort of what we call a functional food. We've decided we'll pack a whole bunch of this extra stuff in there to serve a particular purpose. They can be super convenient. And I think those are two different conversations. Necessity versus like, I've got a 2-hour drive home and I didn't bring a lunchbox, so I haven't packed any food. And actually, like, I can just stop at the servo and purchase this and it's going to tick all my boxes. That might be the best thing for you in that situation. It's, I think, just distinguishing between like, do I need this versus like, I'm going to do this right now because that's the best thing for me in this moment.
I think you're spot on there too. Like you sort of have, a protein shake or something after exercise and you feel like you've ticked a box to an extent. So yeah, I think that's like almost meets a psychological need more than like maybe like the actual need for protein itself within your diet. Would that be right? Yeah.
Yeah. So like you can get it from protein shake, you can get it from food. It's going to do the same thing if it's got a similar amount of protein in it. But I think, and we were talking about this beforehand, like, I'm probably a big advocate, if you're doing something and you feel really good doing it, if it's safe, who am I to say, like, don't stop doing it or stop doing it? Because if you feel good doing it, that's also a positive thing in and of itself, what we call this sort of like placebo effect. Whether it's doing something or not, sometimes kind of doesn't matter if you feel like it's doing something and you feel good doing it. So if it's safe and you have, the financial means to be doing it, like, cool, keep doing it. If you feel like you're A+ performance because of it, and if we were to take it away, you'd feel bad, then we can find a way to take it away and help you feel good, but also, cool, keep going.
There'll probably be like, yeah, a lot of misconceptions and fads around like sport and preparation, particularly that you guys might have in mind. So just hold on to them, and we'll come to you guys towards the end. I suppose the next question is around Red S in sport. Tell us a bit about what Red S is to start off with, the signs and symptoms, and maybe how we can address this at a community level and all the way up to sub-elite and elite levels.
Yeah, so RED-S, or relative energy deficit in sport, just a big lengthy name for not eating enough energy for how much you're expending. So just you're using more energy than what you're taking in is the very basic premise of that. And it's often just a very, like, it's not a big amount, as in you're not sort of like consuming this much and exercising that much. It's often actually a relatively small amount. And it's when that happens over a long period of time where you're just sort of chronically underfueling a little bit, it just sort of chips away at your body's ability to adapt to exercise or, maintain growth and development or just general bodily function. And that's sort of the name that we've given for that condition. To get sciencey for a minute, there is even, people contesting whether it's even a thing or not. Like, have we just given a label to something that's just underfueling? Or like, are we sort of over pathologizing, or is it a real thing? So I'll just sort of flag that because I think it's interesting. But that aside, the impacts stay the same for females. We might get, irregular menstruation, or we might get loss of menstruation. You might get small changes in your weight, potentially something like weight loss, things like low mood, poorer training performance, more regular illness. So sometimes might get an athlete show up and they're sort of like, oh, like, I just feel like I've been sick like nonstop for the last 6 months, or I just keep having like these little niggling injuries. That's when I'm probably like, like, that's really interesting. But you've just been really consistently kind of under the weather, or maybe not performing to the level that you might expect to be. And so that's often a bit of a sign of something like reds and worth taking a look at. And it's sometimes can be really subtle. So it might be something you need to look inwardly to sort of be like, how am I feeling? Or it might be something like S&C coaches are often really well placed to pick up on these things because you're just sort of like, you're a bit off. And it might be something as small as that you're sort of like, okay, maybe we should do a little bit more digging. In terms of management, at an individual level, it's going to be more energy. We're going to need to increase your energy intake because we've been underfueling. Depending on you and your situation, if you've, maybe sustained something like a stress fracture and injury, that's sort of outside of my particular ballpark, but may look like a reduced level of physical activity. And I think that's often the pushback I get from athletes is sort of like, no, like I can't stop training. Like I need to get ready for this game or I need to get ready for this next thing. And so that's what I found the most difficult thing about this type of situation is like, if it looks like I'm going to have to not play, like I don't want to know about it. But we have to sort of, I suppose, stop and think like, are we playing the short game or are we playing the long game? And it's a really hard decision to make. But more energy is sort of the very simplest answer to that one. And then everything else for it, I handball to someone else like Patty and say, you deal with that. I'm doing the food.
Like it. I think like just to elaborate on that too, like often we see in clinic, stress injuries come in, and probably the first point of call that I think straight away is like asking obviously relevant questions around the red S, but also going back and going like, let's take a bit of a blood sample and have a look back with the GP and just see what's sort of going on from I suppose a blood's point of view as well. Are we low in a certain area like calcium or iron? And how can we, I suppose, identify that to then, address that with the dietitian and make some really like, I suppose, calculated and I suppose, understanding, what we're doing with our process after that point. So, yeah, I think like even when I think about sub-elite and elite environments and even community level, it's like, yeah, asking those relevant questions to athletes, but also just, checking in around like what that diet looks like and what the energy expenditure might be. Because often, we'll know straight away if it doesn't add up quite right. And obviously, I know this is more around Naomi, but like, I think a big part that plays into it is like disordered eating and health, like, eating disorders, which is like such a big part in sport because we're trying to fuel our bodies, but often we get into, um, I suppose, a bit of a hole in trying to look good and that side of things too, which is like part of society these days too. So, it can be a bit of a black hole. What's your take on that? I know this is,
Yeah, I think eating disorders and disordered eating is definitely a passion area of mine, so I try not to get too much on my soapbox about it. But sport is rife with it. We have just really strong ideas about maybe what an athlete is meant to look like or how, strong they're meant to be or how fast they're meant to be or like all these types of ideas. And um, generally speaking, food is something that we can control or feel like we have a sense of control over and that I can, choose to restrict something or choose not to eat something. And that's not inherently wrong or problematic. What that is potentially a little bit of a slippery slope down to an eating disorder pathway, or particularly disordered eating. And that's often a big player in something like REDS. It's maybe not super intentional of like, well, I wasn't trying to like, intentionally underfuel. I was just trying to like, like reduce my weight like a little bit and like tone up. And it's this sort of like really feels quite benign or like I wasn't meaning to. I was just like trying to be a good athlete, and be toned and strong and fit and like meet all those types of things. And so you're just sort of like walking this really delicate tightrope of sort of, am I doing that or am I sort of like slipping a little bit this way? And I think it's a really tough space, and eating disorders are not something to mess around with. They are one of the most deadly mental health conditions that we face. And so if you're concerned about anyone in your life that might be experiencing disordered eating or eating disorders, it's definitely something to flag with a coach or like an S&C coach that can pass someone on or do a screening. And it might look like, again, it can feel really sort of benign or not really a big deal to begin with, but it might look like things like you're just spending a lot of time thinking about your body, or you're spending a lot of time thinking about food, or you're, not feeling so comfortable eating in public spaces anymore. You might get invited to hang out with your friends, and maybe it's going out to get burgers or something, and you're sort of like, oh, I'd actually just prefer not to go because that then I have to like be around that food, or I have to be around people and be eating in front of them. So there's like lots of little things that might sort of creep up really slowly, but food is food is fuel, and that's really important in sport. Food is also like culture and fun and joy. Like Christmas is fantastic because you get to like eat all this delicious food and hang out with people and have a fabulous time. And I think sport can sometimes fall in a really tough space where it's like we're so performance focused and fuel focused, and it's like I've got to eat the food so I can like train really good and get the performance, and sometimes it loses its sparkle a little bit. And so trying to keep some of the sparkle, and food is allowed to be fun. It doesn't just have to be fuel.
Can you just distinguish between an eating disorder and disordered eating as well?
Yeah. So an eating disorders, essentially we put a big fancy label on it, and it comes under our big booklet of things in psychology that we can give a particular label to, and it's a much more advanced form of disordered eating. It might look like something like anorexia nervosa, which is probably what most people think of with an eating disorder, is your sort of stock standard, very malnourished, very skinny type person. Could look like bulimia nervosa, which is your sort of binging and purging. And exercise is a form of purging. So it may not be that they're vomiting or doing anything like that. It may be sort of this, I don't like the word unhealthy, but potentially like maladapted, to use an overly fancy word, or just not so helpful way of engaging with physical activity, where we really engage in physical activity in a way that we're sort of not getting positive benefits anymore. And then you have sort of atypical presentations or a variety of other presentations of eating disorders that essentially, the one thing I would say is you don't know whether someone has an eating disorder looking at them. So don't just be looking for physical signs. You're probably more looking for things like social withdrawal, or, just concern around food, or just avoiding particular types of food, that type of thing. Versus disordered eating, think of it like a bit mild. It's sort of, you're not perfectly fine. You haven't got an eating disorder. You're sort of sitting in this gray area where maybe you might tip down an eating disorder pathway, or you might sort of bounce back and be a little bit fine. You're just sort of a little bit hyper concerned about food. We're sort of just spending an unhelpful amount of time thinking about food, or being concerned about maybe the nutritional intake of food. So something that might be common is like, oh, like I just, any foods that have sugar in it, like, no, I couldn't do that. That would be unhealthy. And it's often comes with a lot of hypocrisy. Maybe it's like, oh, I don't eat sugary foods, but they're eating fruit and that has sugar in it, or like most foods have sugar in it, but we just call it carbohydrates, not sugar. So there's you might have particular ideas around food, and we just get a little bit hooked on them. And the sort of key thing here is it becomes disruptive to sort of just going about your daily life. So think about maybe like going and hanging out with friends. If you're sort of like, I'd prefer not to, or that's a little bit stressy because then I'd have to like look like I'm pretending to eat the food when really I don't want to have any of the lollies that are at the party, because that's like a no-no for me. So it's that when we start to lose a bit of that flexibility around food, that is sort of maybe a little bit of a flag to start thinking about it, or just touching base with someone.
Is there a word for when you go over and steal the netball lollies at halftime when you're not playing?
Smart.
Those lolly jars are unreal. Stress injuries and diet. I suppose, how can diet play into the prevalence of maybe stress or overuse injuries? And what does diet and nutrition play in reducing the chances of our athletes having these injuries in the first place?
Yeah, probably maybe similar to before. It's not like the be all and end all. If you're doing too much physical activity, no matter how much food you're having, it's probably not gonna negate or, cure or solve whatever's going on there. What it can do is put you in the best possible position to have the best response to sport or get the most out of your training. So, I think in terms of overuse, we sort of have like enough nutrition and not enough nutrition. If we're sitting below the not enough nutrition line, and this might look like total amount of energy, so we're getting enough energy from any type of food. If we're not getting enough energy, that's definitely going to be something that's going to contribute because your body can't do the things that it needs to do. Like your body's going to continue to prioritize breathing and heart beating and brain function and, like in our younger athletes, like growth and development and other stuff is going to fall by the wayside, or we might impair growth and development. And that is absolutely not something that we want to be doing. So energy, probably number one. Like we just need enough energy, and that's going to hopefully give yourself enough of a buffer that your body can handle a lot of other things happening. That's probably relates back to the protein misconception. People are like, well, protein. And they forget that actually we're like, I need just enough energy so that my body can use the protein in the most helpful way. And then you have other things like vitamins and minerals, and are we getting enough of all of those types of things? And for the most part, most people will be, and we'd probably have to be cutting out particular foods or food groups to be falling in some danger categories there. There are some situations where particularly athletes might have extra high requirements. So iron's probably the most common one across males and females in our more endurance sports or just really high volumes of physical activity. We might have elevated iron requirements, so it can be quite easy to maybe not be getting enough of those foods. And then females generally, we just have higher iron requirements to begin with, particularly for menstruating, and then throw more physical activity on top of that. They can go up again, and it's often not an intentional case, but we just might not be getting enough. Iron's unlikely to sort of, result in something like a stress fracture. That's going to be more total energy intake. But what it might do is just impair general performance. Like you just might not be training as much, or you're getting a little bit tired earlier in training, and so you're not performing as well in training, and then you're not playing as well in your games, and it's this sort of like quite subtle impact. So like nutrition is not showy or flashy. Unfortunately, it's often really subtle, or you might change something and you're like, did that help? Did that not? I don't really know. Like, I think it's doing a good thing. It probably is. You're not gonna, go your test or retest in the gym and be like, man, like my PB's like increased so much. It's really hard to sort of measure that type of success with food, which I think makes it really hard to sort of engage with in an exciting way, because you're sort of like, yeah, like I ate another vegetable and I feel zero difference. um,
Very fair, yeah. I think it's the same with exercise, right? You go out and exercise and, like, you think you'll feel, like, instantly, like, or look instantly stronger or instantly be stronger, but it often takes time and understanding of what works best for you, I suppose, with that intervention, that food, that exercise, and how it works hand in hand there. Gender differences, I suppose we'll touch on. Are there any distinct differences between, how our male and female counterparts, should fuel their bodies?
for the most part, no. It comes back to that energy and sort of just general nutritional requirements. And yes, you'll have different requirements. If we're generalizing, obviously males are generally bigger, taller, potentially more muscle mass, which will mean they need more energy and potentially need more protein. But across like a spectrum, if we just put, a whole bunch of females together, they're all going to weigh different amounts. They're all going to have different amounts of muscle mass, and that nutrition is going to need to be individualized across those people. So for the most part, no. Iron's probably the main exception there, where just at the get-go we have different requirements to begin with. But it probably just comes back to that more individualized nutrition. And again, I can email the handout, but you'll see I've provided like per kilogram ranges. So for protein, I said 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram body mass. So that's for males and females, or whoever you are, whatever you're doing. It's more about your total body mass, and that's what we'll use to sort of get a gauge on what's an appropriate amount for you versus sex at this point. That's not to say that there's going to be more emerging research, because females have been chronically under-researched across the entirety of our history. And there's lots of stuff coming out now where we're like, oh, wow, heck, if you only do it on women, different stuff happens. Like, who would have thought? Lots of people. But we just don't have the data to support that. So potentially yes is the more exciting answer, but I don't have the answers just yet, unfortunately. One thing I will say, more fun fact that I remembered sort of like doing this, is there are some super cool stuff coming around, like our gut microbiota, so all the bacteria that live inside us, and relating back to the previous question about what that might mean for injury risk. So a couple of my colleagues are doing some work with Army recruits at the moment, and they're basically taking a profile of their gastrointestinal bacteria. They all start their entry training and go through that. It's looking like they can predict within about 98% accuracy who's going to get injured within the first 12 weeks or not. Obviously, there's a few things they account for, like, age and that type of stuff, but the bacterial profile seems to be quite a strong indicator for something like injury risk. I can't give you the answers in terms of like, do this to have a great gut microbiota profile. The sort of long and the short of bacteria is like, eat vegetables, eat a variety of sources of fiber, so things like whole grains and fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and all the stuff that everyone tells you to eat anyway. But that stuff will support a healthy gut microbiome, but more just a teaser for watch this space, because that's a pretty wild accuracy prediction for injury.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's really cool though, isn't it? Yeah. What about, like, I suppose if you're a parent in the room and you've got our athletes here, or if like you've got a child, how do you know how much food to have throughout the day? Like, are we measuring it? Are we weighing it? Are we putting it in apps? Like, how are we getting there?
Um, I think something to be, and this is the eating disorder clinician coming out with me, is sort of all of us health professionals sit across the spectrum and have different practices. I'm on the end of the spectrum where I'm probably a little bit more anti-weighing of food, anti sort of hyper measuring and really know what's going on, just because that is a risk factor for eating disorders, or it is a behavior that can lead us down that pathway. In saying that, it's really difficult to know how much, say, proteins in what you're eating unless you look it up. So definitely something that you can sort of get a bit of a gauge on is, around this amount of food is probably going to, get me to about 20 grams of protein in a meal or 20 grams of protein in a snack. And that, for the most part, is going to be a good amount for most people at a particular meal. To sort of get around that, or, know that you're sort of doing the right thing, we're sort of probably aiming to eat around every 2 to 3 hours. That's a nice general rule of thumb or benchmark. If we're sort of eating every 2 to 3 hours and, we're eating a variety of foods over the day, we're probably going to be going all right. It's really difficult as a parent to know whether you're sort of feeding them enough. The one thing I'd probably say is like, trust your kid, and yourself as well. Like, we have inbuilt systems for telling us whether we're hungry or whether we're full, and just respect that. It's going to look different day to day. Like, I don't know if you've ever had a day and you're just like, I am just like insatiable. I've finished my dinner and I'm ready for dinner round 2. Like, cool, eat it. That's all good. And other days you just might not be that hungry, and that's all good too. Your body's actually phenomenally accurate at like working out the math over the long run. It's not about having necessarily like enough energy, like the perfect balance every day. Like, your body kind of takes a tally over a longer period of time, and it's like, 3 days ago you're a little bit under the mark, so I'm just like, push that up today. And you're like, I didn't even do anything today. Your body might be playing catch up from a few days ago where you had a massive training session and you didn't have a snack beforehand, and you kind of weren't that hungry for dinner because it was a really big training session. You felt kind of sick. Your body might play catch up a few days later. And that's okay. We can try and find a bit more balance like across the days with help. But for the most part, I'd say just trust your body. The only thing I would say with that is sport can interfere with our body signals a little bit. So you may have probably experienced it yourself. If you've had like a really hard training session, maybe like a big like lactic acid one, you're like absolutely gassed. Sometimes you can feel a bit like sick in the stomach after sport, and that passes eventually. But probably the last thing on your mind is like, you know what I want to do? Like sit down and smash a whole bunch of food. It's like, no, actually I feel pretty nauseous and I just want to like sip on some water and go to bed. So we just got to work around that. And that might mean that we might have to be a little bit more intentional the day after of like, well, I know I didn't really eat yesterday because I was not feeling so crash hot. Maybe I should just be a little bit more intentional today and make sure I am having a bit of food. But outside of those sort of before and after sport where our signals might get interrupted, like maybe we're super nervous and you can't stomach any food, or just afterwards we feel a little bit unwell, trust your body. And if we know that's happening pre and post, maybe play a little bit of makeup or be a little bit intentional about having some food, if you know that that's been happening for you.
That's a great takeaway. If you could give, one, I suppose, takeaway from the night, to the audience from a sports dietitian's point of view, what would it be?
I am a real underseller of nutrition, probably, and it's something I have to keep in mind for myself. If it sounds too exciting and too fancy, it probably is. If it sounds too scary, it's probably not anything and you can probably ignore it. Eat a variety of foods, eat regularly, enjoy it. That's like what all nutrition comes back to. We dress it up in these really fancy ways, but it's just like eat a range of foods and eat regularly and she'll be right.
I like it. I like it. It's keep it simple, right? Yeah. Yep. That concludes our Q&A between Naomi and I and our set questions, but I'd just like to open it up to our audience tonight and see if there's any questions on the floor.
Sports drinks like Gatorade and Powerade, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Sports drinks, super exciting space. So, from a hydration standpoint, so I'll start with hydration. From hydration, for the most part, not a necessity. Again, things like a carnival day where we might be doing really large volumes of sweat. It might come in handy just because it's really yummy. Like it tastes good. It might taste a bit better than water. It's something you want to be having with water. What sports drinks are really helpful for, an example I like to use is AFL. You know how the runners, if you ever watched a game at AFL, they always take 2 water bottles out. One of them's got a Gatorade or a Powerade in it. One of them's got water in it. A lot of them, you'll see them just spit it out. They just like put it in their mouth and they just spit it out onto the floor and you're sort of like, what good's that? So when we have carbohydrates during activity, we even get a little bit of benefit of it just touching some of the receptors in our mouth. And essentially all it does is kind of just trick your brain into thinking like, I'm not as fatigued as I thought I was. So it can be really helpful that way. It doesn't have to come from something like a sports drink. So a lot of the promotion around sports drinks, less about the hydration and actually more around that little bit of carbohydrate, which you can get from a sports drink. Cool. Keep doing it. You could also get it from a lolly or a banana or like literally whatever you want that has some carbohydrates in it. You don't have to swallow it. You can just spit it out. So if you're someone that doesn't like having anything during the game, you'll still get the same benefit. So basically like, yes, on a super hot day and you're doing heaps of sweating and heaps of physical activity, you might want to pair it with some water. Otherwise, for the most part, like water coupled with food is going to do the same job because there's electrolytes in food and you get the water in the water and it's going to do the same thing. And by electrolytes, I mean things like salt and calcium and magnesium and all those types of things. The main concern with sports drinks is actually just oral hygiene because it's got such high concentrations of sugar. If you're having it, just like have it with water as well. So after you've had some Powerade or Gatorade, have some water as well to kind of wash your teeth just because it's really sugary, which makes it acidic. So it eats away at your teeth enamel. And that's, to be honest, the most thing that I would be concerned about with lots of sports drinks is actually your teeth health. But you can, again, this necessity versus convenience piece. And it's okay to want something for convenience. It's really convenient. That's okay.
Any other questions?
I've got one. Just you touched on before about um sometimes athletes might eat because they feel nervous before a game or anything like that. So if they've like eat 6 o'clock the night before, eaten nothing, got up, don't feel like anything to eat as a parent, do we keep pushing that boundary going, you have to eat something, got to go and play a game? Are there like littlest snacks that we can load up? I don't know. Just trying to get some advice on that one because that's a bit of a struggle point, I think, with trying to push no, you need to eat something to have something in your body,
Like, I'm doing this for your own good. Help me.
as opposed to when you were saying before that sometimes you don't feel like it. So I guess, at what point do you have to have something as a minimum amount, at least, to actually be able to see, not actually hinder them on the court or whatever sport that they're doing?
Yeah. So thinking like particularly an overnight scenario. So if we think we've had some dinner, fantastic, wonderful. Overnight you've gone potentially 8 or more hours without consuming any food. It's definitely time to refuel in the morning if we want to optimize our performance. What we run into there is, potentially a bit of a balance between like more carbohydrates would definitely be helpful, and in an ideal world we have them. If I were to consume them and then feel violently ill, I might end up playing horrible anyway because I feel really gross. So it's sort of finding that balance. In that sort of situation, generally what I would be working on someone with is how can we start like really incrementally introducing a little bit of food in those moments where we're feeling really nervous. And it's probably going to look like nausea management. If anyone's ever had gastro and you're just like, I can't even look at food. Generally what we start with is like some dry, plain, kind of salty biscuits or maybe even like dry toast, and we just kind of like nibble on them. Those would be the types of things, just like really plain, kind of flavorless foods that we'd start with. Um, and as the individual, like you've got to want to do it, and that's probably the hard bit. And it's probably finding the desire of like, what am I wanting to get out of this? Do I want to perform well? And how much do I value, my performance? And if that's high enough, like, am I willing to just like have a bit of a play around and maybe start trying some small amounts of food? But I would go sort of nausea management, like, can we just nibble on some dry toast or dry bickies or, a small bit of lolly, and you sort of build it up from there. Your body can adapt, and it's actually really good at adapting. So in a lot of different, particularly triathlons and marathons, like we practice and we train for eating, as strange as that sounds. So we will do trial runs with food during the race to practice chewing and breathing and running all at the same time and practice eating food and not feeling sick. Our tummies are kind of creatures of habit, like they are aware of the general time frames that we eat. Your bacteria get used to stuff, and so when we go sort of throw out routine or something different happens or we feel sick, it sort of is like maybe a little bit of a toddler. Like sometimes it's going to chuck a tantrum, sometimes it's not, and you can't predict it. But if we can bring in some consistency and sort of like incrementally build that up, you will actually be able to get to a point where your tolerance has improved. I can't guarantee like, yep, you'll be able to eat a meal immediately before the game, but you'll definitely get to a point where your tummy is more tolerant of more food. But yeah, just even like little tiny bits, and we'll just build it up from there.
It's getting buy-in, isn't it? That's the tricky part. Zave, did you have a question?
Yeah, so say you're an athlete who's maybe underfueling for a game, and then they feel tired throughout the game, they think they need more cardio. How do you go about having a conversation with them? There's probably diet rather than cardio.
Absolutely. I think that's probably a really classical textbook scenario is like, I'm not fit enough. And it's like, actually you're probably doing heaps of activity. Probably the maybe a sort of like cheats way, or like without having to get maybe heaps of buy-in, is sort of like, could we just try eating some more food and seeing what happens? Like nothing bad is going to happen. The world won't end if you eat a little bit more food for a couple of weeks. Sort of like I said, your body keeps tabs on these things, and like long-term tabs, like it knows what's going on. And it's sort of like, what if we just like tried throwing an extra snack in? And like I'd probably in that scenario if they're not having something pre-training, like probably try and get them to squeeze it in like pre-training, just because it's a close enough window that they're potentially more likely to feel better doing it, and that might be just enough to get buy-in. But yeah, I'll often just like have the phrase of like, how would you feel about just having a go at eating some more food? And if someone is highly resistant to that, that to me is actually a little bit of a red flag. Like if you're afraid of consuming more food, particularly as an athlete where you're probably doing plenty of exercise and it's not going to be a biggie, I would potentially be sending them to get a little bit of screening or a little bit of help. But yeah, just like, how do you feel about just eating some more? We can do more cardio, but or sometimes deal making, like athletes can be tricky people to work with sometimes, and it's sort of like, okay, well, if you want to do more cardio, you're going to have to eat more food. And some people respond to the foot down approach. I'm quite a gentle practitioner, but for some people it might be like, okay, we're going to have to make a deal. If you want to do an extra conditioning session, you're going to have some more food as well. And that's the only way I'm going to allow you to do that.
I think that comes from coaches too, Zave. Like, often we can see, a team doesn't play well, and often as a coach, you go, "Well, the team's not fit enough," or "The team's not, we haven't done enough conditioning," and it goes back to the S&C or goes back to our conditioning guys, and it's often the other way around where we've done the preparation, we're in the middle of the season, we probably don't have the energy that we should, because we've played game after game, week after week, and maybe been under eating slightly or under recovering slightly.
And it's exam time and we've got lots of assignments due, or I've had a really big week but everyone's had a really big week and we've just all capitulated in the same moment.
It's very common to have that happen, and often, we look at doing more conditioning or getting the players in front of us more, and it's like, I think looking at that and just trying to flip the narrative a little bit and going, right, are these players actually fatigued, under eating? Do we need to, maybe give them a bit more space cognitively? Like, lots of our athletes, particularly sub-elite athletes and guys who are making their way up the ranks, they have full-time jobs, they go to uni, so they have such high cognitive loads and cognitive stress. And if we continue just to like pile it on and blame physical activity for, underperformance, we'll probably soon find the other end of things, which is more underperformance, and probably unhappy athletes and probably not a team the following season sort of thing. So, I think it's sort of understanding that from a coach's point of view as well.
Sleep is very important and really hard to control. Like we all have so many commitments, or I've been at school all day, or I've been at uni all day, or I've been at work all day, and I've made my dinner, and the only time I have to myself is this, maybe 30 minutes to an hour before bed. I could choose to go to sleep and get that little bit of extra recovery, or actually I just want that time to myself, and so we forego potentially a little bit of sleep when potentially that is something that's going to be really helpful because we've done so much strenuous physical activity. I'm not saying that you should be choosing sleep over that time to yourself. All I'm saying is athletes are often managing so many different plates in the air. We've got sleep, we've got food, we've got physical activity, we've got life, which is a whole nother 6 plates on its own of social relationships and uni and work and all these types of stuff. And then it's oh, but you should be sleeping at least 8 hours a night, and you should be eating regularly, and then we're just a little ball of stress.
Yeah, sort of capitulates a little bit, doesn't it? Yeah. Is there any other questions from you guys? Yep.
So you said before there's a 1 hour okay is fine, you don't need to extra fuel. Can the kids are just swimming for 2 hours night every night, and then sometimes they do an hour in the morning? Is there any benefit to maybe eating in that 2 hours while they're training? 2 hours or
Yeah, absolutely. So that sort of 60-minute mark, essentially. Is it a necessity? No. Could it potentially improve performance? Yes. And that might be a situation where a sports drink is actually super handy if we think about is food even physically accessible? If we think about swimming, no, your face is underwater the majority of the time, and you might have a minute in between sets, sometimes even less. And that might be a great scenario where you're sort of like kind of just sort of sip on something like a sports drink or, that type of thing during the training session. And potentially the extra benefit is because we're doing such a high volume of training, like 2 hours every night and then another hour some mornings. That's that sort of back to back to back scenario where I'm talking about where actually we might need to prioritize nutrition a little bit because we've got such a small window between training sessions to fit food in. It becomes more of like a logistical nightmare than anything else. It's sort of like, okay, I've got 8 hours to do sleep, I've got homework to do, and I've got this, and I've got like a 30-minute window to fit all my nutrition in for the next 24 hours. So food during the activity, if we can stomach it, almost helps us get like a little bit ahead of the 8 ball, and we've sort of started our recovery during, if that makes sense. You're sort of getting ahead of it. But yeah, that often comes back to just like pure logistics of what am I physically able to consume during the activity and what can I stomach, and whatever that is carbohydrates and falls into that category is cool beans, go ahead. Like I said, some people can eat like sandwiches and bananas and stuff while they're doing physical activity, and I take my hat off to them. I don't know how to chew and breathe and all at the same time.
Yeah, great question. Is there any other questions out there?
We talk about like nutrition and sleep for recovery. Does, say, fueling your body properly improve the quality of sleep? Like, say, you can only get 6 hours, as in you go in bed late, but you fueled properly, you'd be a better recovery for the next day? Or does it not matter as much?
Yeah, I think that's probably that balancing act. Maybe sleep isn't something we can prioritize because we're just time limited. That might be a situation where if it's in your control, you might up your prioritization of nutrition because it is within your control. You can fit it in, and that is gonna, I suppose, potentially put a bit of a band-aid or a buffer on the potential lack of sleep. Is that, as long as we're sort of keeping on top of that, we're potentially, delaying any negative impacts of sleep, or we're just sort of helping to manage it. In terms of it helping you sleep, there is like some stuff around things like slow release forms of protein and whether that helps improve like muscle recovery. So casein is an example, which is in milk. In terms of like, is this something you should definitely be doing? Chances are we should just be focusing on like general nutrition, and then we can get fancy with that type of stuff. But sort of band-aid scenario, yes, can help you sleep apart from going to sleep hungry. Like it's generally a little bit harder to go to sleep if you're hungry. So if you're hungry, it's probably worth getting up and eating just because you'll probably get to sleep quicker. Trying to get to sleep hungry is not comfy. Which is, it's often that balance of like, do I take the time? I've gotten home at 11 p.m. after a late game. Do I take the time to make dinner and do that? Or do I just like go to bed because I'm really tired? I'm not saying there's a right or wrong. Like I'm probably an advocate for like, just like try squeeze a little bit of food in and then go to sleep so that you're not hungry going to sleep, and you give your body something to work with while you're doing all that downtime, and it can get on top of its recovery.
Any other questions?
Yep.
Do you see a role for nutrition in preventing muscle cramps or stys during a performance or off-goal post?
We're even going to talk about this, but even better, you got a question. So yes and no. The evidence around this is super murky, and actually feel free to correct me if I'm off the money a little bit, but we actually don't really understand why people cramp. They call them like exercise-induced cramps. You have lots of different kinds of cramps. For any of our perimenopausal or menopausal women out there, like you get a different kind of cramp. They're not the same thing, and they're very painful. But something like pickle juice is a common one, or there's other brands called Hot Shot. The fancy thing is they're called a transient receptor agonist channel, or basically a little chemical in food that seems to attach to some chemical receptors in the body that might alter neurological activity, or basically, long and the short of it is, this thing might tone down our body's likelihood to start cramping. And there's lots of fancy like chemical pathways and science behind it. That does have like pretty solid or like moderate evidence behind it, and that if you're regularly cramping or you're finding yourself like third quarter of every game or, always in the second half, I got a cramp coming on, that might be something you actually do play around with. There's something like a pickle juice or a hot shot. If you search pickle juice, it'll come up. Hot shot's just a different brand, and they just contain different other stuff in them. There's a few different chemicals that do a similar job. The pickle juice thing, it's the vinegar. That's sort of the main active ingredient. Tends to be like super pungent stuff. So chili's another one. So capsaicin in chili, similar sort of concept. So you might do that sort of 15 minutes before exercise if there's maybe not a super strong pattern for when your cramps come on. I do find a lot of athletes are sort of like, religiously in this particular time frame I get a cramp and it's always like my calf. You might try and do it if it's like halftime. You might time it for then so that you're sort of like preempting the cramp, and you might have something like a pickle juice then. Alternatively, you can take it like when you have the cramp, and that might help. Like once your cramp settled, that might help less cramping for the rest of the activity or the game. There are other ways you can potentially, if cramping's a big issue, like I would potentially look at seeing like an ex-physiotherapist, because there might be something else going on there, or a way that we can change our physical activity to help. There are things like preemptively inducing a cramp. So particularly at the elite level, like if they're cramping, they might electrically, like we put some nodes on and we induce the cramp the day before, and that might help not have a cramp the day after. It's a pretty painful alternative to reducing your risk of cramping. What we do think is probably more important is actually training and your overall training load. So it can be difficult to replicate the intensity of like a game or like a race in training. And we think that maybe that's why people get cramps, is when not, we're sort of like train. Boom, now I'm at this intensity for a game, and your body's like, don't know about that. Thoughts,
We probably see that more often than not. It's like, particularly in like our field-based sports at the start of the season, you might notice a real trend in players going down with cramps in the first, or first part of the last quarter or in the last quarter. And often, if we look at it from, a higher level standpoint and look at GPS data across training sessions in the lead up, we might find that we aren't, or we haven't loaded enough through our athletes, and they're like the exposure to that load in a game over a longer period of time, they're just not up to it just yet. So that's a very common thing if you're seeing it across multiple athletes. I think also it can depend on the type of athlete you have. Like if your athlete's more of a power-based athlete, or who I call like an F1 athlete, which is high power, high speed, they're probably more likely to cramp because their output's there, and that can sort of play into that like cramping that sort of occurs a little bit. But often it is conditioning, in my world anyway. Yeah.
Well, that's like your sort of best long-term fix for that, is how can we adapt our training and our load to hopefully put us in the best position not to cramp. If we do that and we're still cramping, absolutely, like let's start playing around with something like pickle juice, because if it means we can get through the game, like cool beans. I would say the only thing with those types of things is they're very pungent. Things like pickle juice doesn't taste good, and neither does hot shots. They taste pretty junk. So just sort of balancing, maybe you might want to try it during a training or like before a game so that you don't smash it at halftime. They're tiny little shots. It's like 50 mils. So it's like a couple of mouthfuls. But still, like you can imagine if you just try vinegar mid-game for the first time, your tummy might feel a little bit worse for wear. So you just might want to give it a go in a training session to replicate like that physical activity coupled with that food, just so you're not on game day and then having to run to the bathroom to feel a little bit sick.
Very fair. I think that sort of concludes our Q&A session. I'll now invite Mel Kieran back up to conclude the session, and we'll go from there.
Happy to hang around and answer any questions anyone else has, or the resource. I only printed out a few, but if we want extra copies, I can make Mel email it out to you all.